It was a Tuesday evening in late October when the skies decided to open up without warning. I remember checking my weather app that morning. Clear skies, it had promised. So much for technology. There I was, standing outside the Morgan Library, my portfolio tucked under my jacket in a futile attempt to keep it dry, as sheets of rain transformed Manhattan into a blurry watercolor painting. My name is Elliot Chun, 28, a graphic designer who had just finished presenting concepts to a potential client. The meeting had gone well, but now I was paying the price for my optimism about the weather forecast. My thin jacket was already soaked through, my carefully styled hair now plastered to my forehead, and my shoes, my favorite Oxfords, were definitely ruined. The rain wasn't letting up. If anything, it was coming down harder, drumming against the pavement and creating small rivers along the curbs. Yellow cabs moved like bright fish through the gray city, their headlights cutting through the downpour. I stepped off the curb, arm raised high, hoping to catch the attention of any available driver. The streets were chaos. Everyone had the same idea. Businessmen with expensive suits and newspapers held over their heads, tourists with shopping bags, locals who knew better than to be caught without umbrellas. All of us engaged in the same desperate dance, trying to hail a cab. After 15 minutes of getting progressively wetter, I spotted a taxi with its light on, approaching from the east. I made a dash for it, splashing through puddles, no longer caring about my shoes. As I reached for the handle, another hand grabbed it at the exact same moment. I looked up, ready to argue my case. I had been waiting longer. I was soaked. I had important artwork that was at risk of water damage, but the words died in my throat. The man standing opposite me was roughly my height, with dark hair curling from the rain and the most striking blue eyes I'd ever seen. He wore a navy peacoat that somehow managed to look good despite being drenched. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we just stood there, rain pouring down around us, both of our hands on the taxi door handle. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached those blue eyes and created small crinkles at the corners. "Looks like we're both having the same terrible day," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. "Share the cab." Before I could respond, he pulled the door open and gestured for me to get in. There was something about his confidence, the casual way he took control of the situation, that left me momentarily speechless. I slid across the seat, my wet clothes squeaking against the vinyl, and he followed, closing the door behind him. The sudden silence as the rain was shut out was almost disorienting. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at us in the rearview mirror. I hesitated, suddenly aware of how strange this situation was. I was sharing a taxi with a complete stranger, a very attractive stranger, and I had no idea where he was headed. West Village," I said finally. "Bleecker and McDougal." "And you?" the driver asked my companion. "Actually, I'm headed to Chelsea," he replied. "But West Village first, please." The taxi pulled away from the curb, windshield wipers working overtime against the downpour. Inside, the car was warm and humid from our wet clothes, the windows already beginning to fog. I clutched my portfolio to my chest, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the swish of wipers and the patter of rain on the roof. "I'm Noah, by the way," he said finally, extending his hand. "Noah Reeves." "Elliot Chun," I replied, taking his hand. It was warm despite the rain, his grip firm but not aggressive. There was something about the simple touch that sent a small current up my arm. I pulled my hand back perhaps a bit too quickly. "So, Elliot Chun," Noah said, settling back against the seat. "What brings you out in this biblical deluge without an umbrella? Are you one of those optimists who believes the weather forecast?" I laughed, surprised by how accurately he'd pegged me. "Guilty as charged. The app said clear skies all day. Never trust technology when it comes to New York weather," Noah said, shaking his head. "The buildings create their own weather systems. I've lived here for 5 years, and I've learned to always carry an umbrella, even on the sunniest days." "5 years? Where were you before that?" I asked, curious about his accent. "London, originally. Then Barcelona for university, a year in Tokyo, and now here. I tend to move around a lot." That explains the accent. It's like a global tour in every sentence. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "That's the nicest way anyone's ever described my mud of an accent. What about you? Are you a born and bred New Yorker?" No. I grew up in San Francisco, came here for school at Parsons, and never left. That was 7 years ago. Parsons? So you're an artist? His eyes fell to the portfolio I was still clutching. Graphic designer. I corrected. Just had a meeting with a potential client. I was showing them some concepts for their rebranding. Did it go well? The meeting, I mean. I found myself smiling, remembering the client's enthusiastic response to my presentations. Actually, yeah, really well. They love the direction I'm taking. That calls for a celebration, doesn't it? Noah said, his eyes bright with interest. Even if you were soaking wet. The taxi slowed as we hit traffic on 6th Avenue. The rain continued to pound on the roof, creating a strangely intimate cocoon inside the vehicle. I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, our shoulders nearly touching. Droplets of water clung to Noah's eyelashes, and I had to resist the urge to reach out and brush away a strand of hair that had fallen across his forehead. "So what do you do?" I asked, trying to maintain some semblance of normal conversation despite the unusual flutter in my chest. "When you're not rescuing strangers from the rain, I mean." "I'm a translator," he replied. "Primarily Japanese to English, but I also do Spanish and French. I work for a publishing house, translating novels." "That's fascinating," I said, genuinely impressed. "Do you get to choose what you translate?" "Sometimes. If I find something I'm passionate about, I can pitch it to my editors. But most of the time, they assign projects based on market demand and my availability." He shifted slightly, his knee brushing against mine. Neither of us moved away. "It's a good job for someone who can't stay in one place too long. I can work from anywhere." "Are you planning to move again soon?" I asked, surprised by how much I hoped the answer was no. Noah's eyes met mine, and there was something in his gaze that made my breath catch. "I'm not sure yet. New York has a way of surprising me just when I think I've seen everything it has to offer." The taxi turned onto Bleecker Street, the wipers still fighting the relentless rain. We were getting closer to my destination, and I felt an unexpected reluctance to reach it. Our conversation had flowed so naturally, as if we'd known each other for years rather than minutes. "This is a bit forward," Noah said suddenly. "But would you like to grab a coffee? Or maybe something stronger? There's a good bar near where you're getting off, the Garret. We could dry off and continue this conversation." My heart did a small flip in my chest. Was he asking me out? Or was this just a friendly gesture from someone new to the city? I hesitated, torn between the pile of work waiting for me at home and the undeniable pull I felt toward this stranger. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. "I know the Garret well, actually. It's one of my favorite spots." The smile that spread across Noah's face made my decision worth it immediately. The taxi slowed to a stop at the corner of Bleecker and McDougal. The rain had eased slightly, but it was still coming down steadily. "Wait," Noah said as I reached for the door handle. He shrugged off his pea coat and held it up like a makeshift umbrella. "Let's make a run for it. The bar's just down the block, right?" I nodded, watching as he paid the driver for both of our fares despite my protests. Then he was opening the door, holding his coat above us, and we were dashing through the rain together, our shoulders pressed close, laughing as we dodged puddles and pedestrians. The Garret was warm and dimly lit, the kind of place that feels like a secret even though it's well known. We found a small table in the corner, away from the windows and the reminder of the storm outside. Noah draped his wet coat over an empty chair, and I carefully set my portfolio on a dry spot under the table. "What can I get you?" he asked, still standing. "Bourbon, neat," I replied, surprising myself. I usually ordered beer, but something about the evening, about Noah, made me want something bolder. He raised an eyebrow, impressed. A man after my own heart. "I'll be right back." As he made his way to the bar, I took the opportunity to really look at him. His white button-down shirt was damp and clung to his shoulders, revealing a lean but defined build. His dark jeans were similarly affected by the rain, and his hair was beginning to dry in soft waves. He moved with an easy confidence, exchanging a few words with the bartender that made both of them laugh. When he returned with our drinks, he sat closer than necessary, our knees touching under the small table. "To unexpected encounters," he said, raising his glass. "And to the rain," I added, clinking my glass against his. The bourbon was smooth and warm, spreading heat through my chest that had nothing to do with the alcohol. We fell back into conversation easily, discussing everything from our favorite translations of classic novels. He had strong opinions about different versions of The Stranger, to the best hidden food spots in the city. I insisted he try the dumplings at a tiny place in Chinatown that didn't even have a sign. As we talked, I noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how he leaned forward slightly when I was speaking, giving me his full attention. There was an intensity to his focus that made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. I found myself sharing things I rarely discussed with new acquaintances: my parents' expectations for me to become a doctor or lawyer, my struggle to establish myself in a competitive field, my love for creating art that served a purpose beyond aesthetics. That's what I love about translation, Noah said, his second drink now almost finished. It's creative, but it's also functional. I'm building bridges between cultures, helping ideas cross boundaries they couldn't otherwise. Exactly. I agreed, feeling a thrill at being so perfectly understood. Design is the same way. It's not just about making things look pretty. It's about solving problems, communicating complex ideas simply. The bar had grown more crowded as the evening progressed, forcing us to lean closer to hear each other. I could smell Noah's cologne, something woodsy with hints of citrus, mingling with the scent of rain that still clung to both of us. "Can I ask you something?" Noah said, his voice lower now, more intimate. "Of course," I replied, aware of the slight quickening of my pulse. When we both grabbed that taxi door, he began, his eyes never leaving mine. "Did you feel something? Like a jolt, or a connection, or—" He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. I know that sounds ridiculous. I took a breath, deciding to be honest. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." The noise of the bar seemed to fade away as we looked at each other. Noah's gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then back to my eyes, a question in his expression. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He leaned forward, closing the distance between us, and pressed his lips gently against mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was giving me time to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away. Instead, I found myself responding, my hand moving to rest on his arm, feeling the damp fabric of his shirt and the warmth of his skin beneath. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. His hand found the back of my neck, fingers threading through my still damp hair. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. It could have been seconds or minutes before we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless. "I've never done that before," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the bar's ambient noise. "Kissed someone?" Noah asked, looking surprised. I laughed. "No. Kissed a stranger I met in a taxi during a rainstorm. It feels like something out of a movie." "The best stories often do," he replied, his hand still resting lightly on my arm, as if reluctant to break contact completely. "And for the record, I don't think we're strangers anymore." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and occasional touches. His hand on mine as he emphasized a point, my knee pressed against his under the table, our shoulders touching as we leaned in to hear each other over the growing crowd. We discovered a shared love of obscure foreign films, a mutual dislike of cilantro. "It tastes like soap," we both exclaimed at the same time, and a similar tendency to get lost in our work for hours without realizing how much time had passed. As midnight approached, I reluctantly checked my watch. "I should probably head home," I said, though everything in me wanted to stay. "I have an early client call tomorrow." Noah nodded, understanding but clearly as reluctant as I was to end the evening. "Let me walk you home," he offered. The rain seems to have stopped. Outside, the city had that fresh, clean smell that only comes after a heavy rain. The streets glistened under the streetlights, puddles reflecting the neon signs and traffic signals. We walked slowly, neither of us in a hurry to reach our destination. "So," Noah said as we turned onto my street, "what happens now?" I looked at him, taking in his hopeful expression, the way the streetlights caught in his eyes. "Well, traditionally, this is where I'd give you my number and we'd make plans to see each other again." "I'd like that," he said, pulling out his phone. "Very much." We exchanged numbers, and I found myself smiling at the thought of seeing his name appear on my screen. As we reached my building, there was a moment of hesitation, the awkward pause that comes at the end of a first date, when neither person is quite sure how to say goodbye. Noah solved the problem by leaning in and kissing me again, this time with more confidence, but no less tenderness. "Thank you for sharing your taxi," he murmured against my lips. "Thank you for pulling me inside," I replied, reluctantly stepping back. and for everything that came after. He waited as I unlocked the door to my building, raising his hand in a small wave as I stepped inside. Through the glass, I watched him walk away, his hands in his pockets, a slight bounce in his step that made me smile. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I replayed the evening in my mind. The initial surprise of our meeting, the easy flow of our conversation, the unexpected but perfect first kiss. It had all started with such an ordinary moment. Two people reaching for the same taxi door in the rain. How many times had I almost connected with someone like that? Only to pull back, to stay within the safe boundaries of polite interaction. Inside my apartment, I set my portfolio down and checked my phone. There was already a message from Noah. Just making sure you have my number too. Sleep well, Elliot. Looking forward to our next unexpected encounter. Though maybe we could plan this one. I smiled, typing back a reply. Planning has its advantages. But I've recently discovered the charm of the unexpected. How about a compromise? Dinner tomorrow, location TBD based on the weather forecast. His response came almost immediately. Perfect. I'll bring an umbrella just in case. As I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but think about how differently the evening could have gone. If I had been more assertive about the taxi, if Noah had been less willing to share, if either of us had been too shy to suggest continuing our conversation at the bar, we might never have discovered what was possible between us. It's strange how life pivots on such small moments. A taxi door, a rainy evening, the courage to say yes to something unexpected. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself grateful for the rain, for wrong weather forecasts, and for the simple human connection that can begin with something as ordinary as reaching for the same door handle. In the days and weeks that followed, Noah and I continued to see each other. We explored the city together. He showed me hidden bookstores I'd never discovered despite my years in New York, and I introduced him to art galleries and design studios that fascinated him. We cooked dinner in my tiny kitchen, laughing as we bumped into each other in the limited space. We spent rainy Sundays curled up on his couch, watching those obscure foreign films we both loved, pausing occasionally for discussions about the translation or the cinematography, or simply to kiss. It wasn't always perfect. We had our disagreements, our moments of miscommunication. His nomadic nature sometimes clashed with my need for stability. My tendency to get lost in work occasionally frustrated his spontaneous spirit. But we learned to navigate these differences, to find the balance that worked for us. And sometimes, when we're walking through the city and it starts to rain, we'll look at each other and smile, remembering that first evening when we both reached for the same taxi door, when he pulled me inside first, lips second, and changed the course of both our lives in the process. They say New York is a city of 8 million stories. Ours is just one of them. A story that began in the rain, with a shared taxi and a leap of faith. It's a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary connections can begin in the most ordinary moments, if only we're brave enough to reach out and grab them. Total _char_count, 17,992.